Welcome to the Startup Defense. My name is Callie Keene. Today I have Robert Shelton. Now, Robert he's happily retired now, but Robert is a great entrepreneurial thought leader and really played a very pivotal role at a large organization that I think most of us are fairly familiar with. But before we get into that, Robert, what are you passionate about right now?
Yeah, even though I'm retired, I spend way too many hours every day reading about tech. And the area that I focus on or have focused on over the last probably 2 years, maybe three, has been artificial intelligence. And generative AI has completely changed even what I thought was advanced 2 years ago. So I spent a bunch of time in my retirement time learning how to program in Python and doing things with artificial intelligence.
That's the exciting topic of the day right now, injecting AI into everything. Can you speak a little bit about your background? Because your former employer is really pushing a lot of that AI revolution right now and just injecting it into everything. But this will give some good perspective of who is Robert, tech wizard Robert Shelton. There's a little bit
Also,
of context here.
yeah. So I spent 30 years in the industry. I did everything from software development to DBA to networking and various levels of management. My last job was at Microsoft. And so I worked for Microsoft in the federal industry, working specifically with national security and intelligence.
Yeah, this is great because I think I've been around technology and certainly startups long enough to remember just a handful of years ago where defense was a no-go. Forget about working with our friends in the intelligence community or working with deployed teams or anything specific like that, but just general applying those tech talents towards critical infrastructure, big government projects. I think everybody remembers Google's Project Maven, them backing out of that. But while other people backed out, Microsoft stepped up and is in a really good place right now because they're not a small fish in general, but they really helped move that market. And you were a critical part of that move of providing all that tech talent and knowledge and working towards national security problems, right? Applying what Microsoft
Absolutely.
has and modernizing that equipment. I know that there's a lot of very important walls and barriers of what we can and can't talk about with that, but it's just an interesting narrative in general. Can you maybe talk about that transformation that the tech industry has had, or that kind of coming of age moment is, hey, we can go into this federal space? What does that even look like?
Yeah, when I started in that business, it was very immature. Steve Ballmer was the CEO at that time. And you're right, when Google backed out of Project Maven, one of the proudest moments, at least in my team's time, is when our current CEO, Microsoft current CEO, Satya Nadella, stepped up and said that Microsoft would absolutely support the federal government. At the time, we had been selling the government Microsoft technology for a long while, but it was Office and Windows and some very custom solution for mission enablement things that obviously I can't talk too much about. But Microsoft has been around for a long time in the intelligence space on all fabrics. When I started, it was all about selling licenses and trying to get Windows on every client desktop. But towards the latter part of my time at Microsoft really started focusing on the mission. It had just put out a secret and top secret cloud. Amazon was there, of course, first. And I believe Google and Oracle also have reached the other fabrics. But Microsoft is bringing the full bag of tricks to the defense and intel agencies. I know that OpenAI's Azure implementation is one of the things that the government's very interested in, from everything from the standard government with the GCC high all the way up to, I'm sure that it's going to roll out on top secret if it already has. And I've been gone for about a year and a half at this point, so I don't know what the current status of it. But I know that was something the government was very interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. To do a native secure LLM implementation so it's inside of that enclave
Yeah.
and use those tools and bake those tools in is really interesting because obviously somebody like myself, like, I see all these fun tools that people use and I can't use them day
Yeah.
to day
Right.
on my
Right.
computer. So even the promise of, hey, down the road, being able to use some of those or even a similar tool with my work, it's very appealing. But yeah, it's been such an interesting road to see that leadership from some of the bigger companies. And then I feel like that attracted startups and that attracted funding. And that's how we met, is through working with startups. And I know you have a big passion for entrepreneurship and passing lessons learned. And yeah, I think that's a great analog for the entire market, right? Is
Yeah.
technology people applying their discipline to big problems in our space, national defense, and then working with entrepreneurs to bring them into that mix as well. So we get that really passionate, interested, emerging startup vibe to solve things in a new way. That's what really gets me excited. I know that you share that excitement, that tech excitement, but
Yeah,
how,
I just on that one real quick. One of the
yeah,
interesting things that once I got on the other side into skips and got to talk to the government, prior to getting cleared and getting in that space, I would have thought that the most innovation came from the large systems integrators. It turned out that if you were thinking like, how do I deliver email to an administrative assistant or some government executive, that was generally the big systems integrators that were implementing that type of tech. It was Microsoft Tech, but they would win the massive 10-year, hundreds of millions of dollar type of contract to deploy that. But when it came to the mission or building something that was extremely unique, it was always these 10-man firms or 3-person firms, where in a lot of cases, 1 or 2 people who got a small personal services contract. And they were implementing things that, even working for Microsoft, I was like, you took our technology, which was meant for one thing, and used it for this completely other thing. And that was the thing that was most impressive to me. So during that period of time, I understood that for the mega big implementations, they were always going to go to Microsoft anyway, because Word, and they were really big competitors to Office and Windows. There were some along the way, but they all went away. But anything that Microsoft wanted to do that was going to be truly impactful was going to be by a smaller company, probably 80-90% of the time. But yeah, I had great affinity for that segment of companies, the startups and the small ones.
and is that a driving force why, now that you've retired, you have been engaged that and worked with the startup community, accelerators, entrepreneurs?
Yeah, yourself. The difficulty when you're dealing with defense and intel, everything has to be accredited and it has to go through a lot of security reviews, and nothing against the larger firms. Again, Microsoft actually has its own consulting practice. It's a part of Microsoft, but a different division than a group than what I work with. They won contracts and that sort of thing. So nothing against the bigger guys, although Microsoft wouldn't be considered bigger, but they're bigger than a lot of the companies that I am now talking to and working with. The time frame between idea to pilot proof of concept to deployment is typically in years, right? Often the government has a part of that delay, but it's also the delay that's built into companies having to be concerned about stock price, and the red tape, and the engine's got to churn, right? I like the smaller companies' ability to quickly innovate and get something out there. Now, even at Microsoft, my group specialized in doing that sort of thing as well. Quick innovation, show proof of concepts. But it's very rare to see that in bigger companies. The smaller companies are the ones who I think are making the big change. Even in broader tech, you look at OpenAI as compared to Google, both were doing AI. Google, obviously, before OpenAI. But it took the small company, OpenAI, to actually move the market ahead. And I would say by orders of magnitude ahead. So that's why I like working with the smaller companies.
Yeah, I think we share that. We share that affinity for sure. If you want to stay abreast of the changes, even you think somehow OpenAI or these other competitive solutions, they've maintained that speed, but over time, there's going to be other innovative solutions and staying in the trenches with the startups. You also get to see all the fun tech, right?
Yeah,
Talk to smart people and see how they're thinking, and you get to see things maybe a couple of years before everybody thinks. We've been working with AI for more than half a decade, like deploying it for product. And so it gets me really excited when everyone else is excited about things, but also like we've had people in the accelerator programs with essentially different models, but what you would look at then, you'd think, hey, isn't that Chat GPT? No, is another thing. We've been deploying it in defense for 5-6 years into product, and that's behind the scenes piece. But then now everybody's excited. You get this proliferation of all technologists jumping in and adding their piece and adding their piece, and it just accelerates and snowballs from there. It does. You can hear it gets me a little excited because you get to
yeah,
see something new every day. I really
yeah,
enjoy that piece, but
yeah.
I'd love to get your take because I know you are following the AI revolution very closely. So one, I'll ask you a more boring question. What do you think that it's going to do for knowledge worker jobs? And then I want to get your opinion just on what are fun things that you see in the market. But it really is changing what people do, how they do it, what jobs are available. It's already changing what programmers are getting hired. And it's not even very good at programming yet.
Right.
So, like in general, there are Devon. You probably saw the Devon
As a former
demo.
developer, that's interesting to me. Yeah.
Yeah, but how do you think that's going to impact the workforce? For we're both coming out of a knowledge worker base. What do you think that's going to do for the tech industry?
Yeah, I was having a conversation with somebody, and actually they were in education, and they were asking a very similar question. And my response is, I actually posted this on LinkedIn, I think right after the conversation, about what happened to the horse and buggy industry when the automobile released, and a lot of jobs went away. And I want to say that, if I remember correctly, like hundreds of thousands of people in the coach business went away.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was replaced by millions of people in the auto industry. There's, as innovation comes out, there's always the replacement of one type of job and typically an increase of another type of job. When I was in the high school, they taught us how to type. They had typewriters. I go back to typewriters. And I remember watching movies where they had office pools of secretaries that were just, they would type things and to make duplicates and triplicates and deploy all of these. No one does that anymore, right? I think AI is going to, interestingly enough, go towards the white collar work. And I think the generative AI added to robotics is making the conversation about blue collar relevant maybe a year or so from now. So I think it's going to drastically change. Certain career fields will go away or get severely reduced. I think in the software industry, which I came from, when I started out, people got paid reasonable incomes for fresh out of college, people with T backgrounds. And then I remember as a manager, I used to be an executive at USA Today. I remember people fresh out of college demanding $100,000, and there was nothing I could do. I had to pay the $100,000. The last thing, and these are typically developers, the last thing I wanted them to do was write any code, right? Because we had to now teach them how to write code professionally. It's different when you're in school. When you get into a corporate environment and you have large groups of professional developers, it's apprenticeship. You put them with the senior developer, but the senior developer often didn't make that much more than the junior developer or fresh developer right out of college at that point. I think with AI, I think it's going to not eliminate software development, as I hear like the chairman of NVIDIA says. I think it will adjust how software development will pay. And I think it will flush out a lot of the people who are not passionate. People who get computer science degrees, learn how to program, really don't care about software development, right? And they come in, they do their 5 years, and then they try to go into management, become project managers or whatever. I think that will change. You're going to actually have to be, ironically, because AI makes things a lot easier and will replace certain aspects. I believe it's going to go back to like when I started in the industry, which was you had to be really good at it because the basic stuff, the AI will just do. And so what it doesn't do, you're going to need actually to be good at software development or networking or infrastructure name any of those, because the AI is going to be able to do the things that journeymen are doing today for a lot more money. That's my, and I think it's going to be the same thing in other spaces. One of the big ones that I'm looking at now is how AI is used in mental health, that it can provide people with real time support. Right now, if you want a therapist, by the time you get one on the line, work through the insurance, actually get to talk to them, unless it's an emergency, you're looking at weeks, right? Again, especially because of the insurance. You can pay $20, get on ChatGPT, and get a lot of good insight. It's not quite the same, but it's better than weeks. I think that'll affect that industry as well, and so many others.
I can see this leveling up happening. We get involved in a lot of data sensor fusion, or you can think of connected devices, be
Yeah,
another application of this. And there's an element, the rote work of this. I could easily see AI helping you write a Python script that does X, turns a camera on, sends data, this. But to know what to build, what technology stack to use, how to interpret the data, a lot of the connected concepts or new concepts of this, we're quite a bit away from AI just out of the box being able to provide those like higher order thinking,
yeah,
but the execution function of that concept. So not knowing what to pitch, but then knowing like how to do it. It's a massive enabler or a time saving. So maybe now a senior developer or a systems engineer can work as a senior developer, or a senior developer can act like they have 5 junior developers on their team and be able to turn a product or MVP very quickly. But it's not going to magically come up with an idea that somebody wants and then build all of it and then make it appear. At least not yet. And I'm like, I'm not out of a job yet. And like when
although Devin was pretty impressive from what I've
it was pretty impressive. That's right. Thankfully for me, right now, until Figure really gets out there, somebody's got to turn screws and make that product a real thing, and they've got to go put it in a place and make sure it all works. But it's the perspective. I think what you're saying is true. It's an enablement. We just don't know what that job is, because uh, I use the horse and buggy analogy frequently with people. Also, a fun bit of U.S. history is when kerosene became more prevalent. The whole whaling industry fell out within a couple of decades. So it was the largest industry in the United States. And then kerosene comes along. You don't have to hunt whales anymore. So this large industry goes to nothing within a couple of decades, leaving entire towns gone.
devastated.
They just closed up shop. There's villages in New England that just completely shuttered. But we did okay, right? Mostly we just didn't kill whales as much anymore. So it worked out well for everybody in the long run. So even in that case, which was massively disruptive and in the short term, n- not that great, right? Seemed not productive. In the long run, worked out really. We got gasoline as a byproduct of creating kerosene, which enabled us to have the combustion engine, which enabled us to have that automotive replace the horse and buggy. This is just how technology works, is that when it hits, it changes the world. And at the interim time, you think, hey, I have the most prosperous city in America, and now it's in ruins. But another decade after that, people have just moved on. They're just doing something else,
I
right?
think that'll happen here. As you were telling the story, I remember having a conversation, and I can't remember her name. I ended up doing a couple of presentations with her at industry conferences. She was an executive for NGA. And what she was saying, and we were doing artificial intelligence back then, or what we thought was artificial intelligence until we saw generative AI. Now I realized that was DOS, and that generative AI is like a graphical user interface. But she said something that always struck me. She said, we get petabytes of data a day, petabytes, and are only able to look at a very small percentage of that. A lot of the rest of it gets thrown on the floor. And I asked, why is that? And she says, there's not enough analysts in the world. The requirements you have to be in order to become an analyst are relatively high. And a lot of that comes from experience, right? And the way you get experience is by being a thing and then doing it for a certain period of time. And so we engaged in like a proof of concept to do something for it, but that wasn't the important part. I actually got to spend time watching analysts do their jobs. And one of the things I found out was like a large percentage of it was getting data in one format, running scripts and massaging the data to try to get it in another format, to then load it into some disparate system that does a thing that associates that data with another piece of data to which they get the output from, and then they massage that into, and ultimately it ends up in Excel, right? Which is, I joke, say Microsoft's number one database product is Microsoft Excel. And then once it's in Excel, an analyst can then start looking for things, or sometimes it's a querying system, some sort of an index search system. But a good chunk of that time is just like trying to get the data into a point where a human can actually read it. And AI doesn't have that particular problem. It not that it doesn't have other things that it can't do, but the ability to look at mass amounts of data in disparate formats without having to munge it and look for common occurrences or things that are not very common in that data, that's going to be a game changer. So now an analyst can actually look at the summary data and doesn't have to do all of the munging to get it to a point where they can look at it. So I think about like especially when it comes to national security, having gone through all the training, I worry about the data that got thrown on the floor. You saw what just happened in Russia. There were warnings, and there are political things that go along with that. But I'm sure that their analysts got the same sort of warnings that the United States gave them. And like our 9/11, it didn't rise to a level of importance because they're looking at petabytes of data a day. How do I know
Right.
which one of the things to focus on? Well, AI doesn't sleep, doesn't take coffee breaks or bathroom breaks, doesn't argue with his wife the night before, and doesn't have the focus that it should, or it just does its thing 24/7 and can scale up. So petabytes get looked at versus a few megabytes. So anyway, that's when you were talking, that's the first thing that came to my mind was the conversation I had with that executive at NGA.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you think that's a Palantir solution, right?
Yeah.
It's a $1 billion, really bespoke, super powerful solution. It's been
Yeah.
around for a long time.
Yeah.
It's done some real impactful work. And I think about this often is they can't go out and say, hey, we did this, we did that. Our system prevented this, prevented that, obviously. But the power of being able to mine all that data, look at disparate data and say, hey, here's the markers of someone who's planning an attack or is going to take this action. That's getting dumbed down to the point where, yeah, now I can take Postgres SQL database and a bunch of Word documents and smash them all together and then ask a question and get answers out of it and not really even have to figure out how does that even work. A knowledge base and query a knowledge base of just articles and get an actual answer out of it. And so the new generation of this AI a bit with data, we've had a couple people on the show that are doing plain language queries of different databases. So there's a couple of very interesting products out there, but of disparate data solutions and bringing it in together, I think, man, a decade ago, that was $1 billion. Today,
Absolutely.
it's something cool I just saw on Product Hunt.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's pretty frightening or pretty exciting, whichever side of the fence. I'm a technology maximalist, so
Yeah.
I have to think that I really don't need 100,000 horses in New York City. I think that we can move on beyond that, but time will tell.
Yeah. You brought up Palantir. I remember when they first entered the space, and they were just a small, really small group of incredibly talented people, like stupid talented. And they created a product that we all know is extraordinarily powerful even today. But an interesting thing happened because of the innovation that they had, and they have to pay for extraordinarily talented people. Palantir is not inexpensive. One of the things that the government, I remember complaining to Microsoft about a lot, was the price tag. We're expensive. Microsoft's expensive, but like Palantir is like an order of magnitude more expensive. but it does what it does extraordinarily well. So well that if you are a small company, 10 people, your ability to even remotely get close to what they do, forget it. Two
Right.
years ago, I would have said game over. Even a big company like Microsoft, the only way to compete with Palantir would be to acquire it. And but now, with their vision capabilities that you see in some of these tools and pattern recognition and speech recognition, and there are a lot of things that a small company could do that within a niche could absolutely compete with a Palantir.
So
Uh,
certainly at a 60 or 80% level of competition, but at a hundredth of the price. That's really what we're seeing is
yeah,
$20 a month tool that I can just plug and play. Now I have a machine vision system that I can train to recognize faces. And
yeah.
I spent 10 minutes building it. Like,
Without the
wow.
overhead of having a PhD who has a degree in vision science, right?
Exactly.
I just need to know how to call the API,
It's just me goofing around like one afternoon and I can build that thing.
and it's
And
incredibly powerful for the government, right? Because as a government executive, I might have the ability to approve $100,000 pilot.
mhm,
What are you going to do with Palantir for $100,000? You're not going to even get a phone call back.
yeah,
It's just
they know their lane and yeah, they're sticking to the premium model because I know that they've moved up market similarly in the past couple of years as well. But it's just interesting from a tech perspective is to see like what we would consider unbelievable 10 years because we worked on like license plate readers,
yeah,
facial recognition. We've got a couple of people in gun detection, like we've had Chad Green on here building handgun detection. You think, man, that's really cool. There's a couple people in the space just doing this really well. But what I could do today is I think I could build this, you
right,
know, like versus, yeah, like you said, get a PhD, get a couple of senior devs in here, go through a year of building hardware, building a hardware software solution, going and doing field tests. I can just buy a board from Blaze and they have that model already in their AI studio. I can just drag and drop it and have it like right now. You
yeah.
know what I'm saying? For nothing.
It's a crazy. And the interesting thing is some people would say, wait a minute, that's going to totally disrupt the industry. And you have two ways of looking at it. Yeah, that's like problematic if you're one of these high-end developers or a specialist where you're sought after because you're one of five people who know how to do a thing.
Hmm.
But at the same time, imagine if across the entire security apparatus you had that ability, and instead of costing $1 million, it costs $100,000. And
Right.
now we can all be safer. I remember doing a presentation for TSA years ago, and they were talking about the data that they get from the scanners, and we were talking about a proof of concept that would allow them to take that data and then correlate it to find if you and I were traveling from two different locations and planned on hijacking or blowing up a plane. And somewhere in the data, there's a relationship between us that they've picked up in that you have a part of a weapon that by itself is innocuous, right? You could just be taking it to a gun show, and I have a part of a weapon, and three other people have a part of a weapon, and then by in and of themselves, they don't throw off the scan. But if we all travel within a certain period of time going to a location and we each have a part of a weapon, the ability for the TSA to be able to identify that pattern and then pull us all. This was, I think, Admiral Neffinger was the administrator at that time. So I think this may be almost 7, 8 years ago. The ability to do that today is actually API calls. The ability to
Right.
do it back then, when we were talking about putting together a proof of concept, even proof of concept would have been $1 million+,
Right.
and maybe 10% effective. Right? It's incredible that kind of capability it may exist right now, but that you could do that now, and back then it would have been a heavy lift.
Wow. Robert, I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. Before we go, do you have any parting thoughts, like a gold nugget for our audience?
Yeah, one of the things that, especially now that I've spent a little more time working for a large company. Even though for my group getting internal funding wasn't easy. The money was there, right? I had to put together a business case, and in a lot of cases, the company says, "Sure, here's $100,000 or $1 million. Don't do anything stupid with it." But and working with some of these startups now, I realize how many great ideas could go forward if but for $100,000. And I want to say to, especially to the startups who have a good idea, that I'm happy that the tools are becoming inexpensive enough for you to be able to at least have a shot at using it and to work your butt off just to get it out there. Whatever your idea is, get it in GitHub, get it put together a YouTube video. You never know who is going to see that. That YouTube video that goes viral could be the difference between you never having a business and you being a multi-billion-dollar business. And especially because I worked in national intel and defense, I'm hoping that a lot of you will spend time on making sure that planes in the United States don't go boom. That's my number one thing, is to make sure that our country is secure. And I think a lot of the innovation will come from the smaller companies. And I just wish that they would continue to push forward and get their proof of concept pilot idea out there, and platforms like YouTube and podcasts like yours, and however you need to get it out there so it can be seen by someone as soon as possible.
Yes, absolutely. There's more people out in the world waiting to support you than you think, right? If you start building those relationships, you'll find that there's somebody at Microsoft that's running a program that they want to co-pilot a thing with you. There's
Absolutely.
somebody at the DoD that will give you non-dilutive capital to help build that prototype or help field it. Or there is a world of support out there that's just beyond hiding in your room thinking about an idea versus getting it out there. I think that's
Absolutely.
great advice. Robert, thanks again. My name is Callie Keene, and this has been the Startup Defense.